My son called me financially illiterate over a $486.72 brunch in Charlotte, North Carolina. Funny thing is, the man sitting across from him had spent almost 10 years teaching financial advisors using a book I wrote under a different name. You know that look people get when they realize they've insulted the wrong person? Stay with me here. Because Brandon Russell thought my old Toyota Camry, my faded blue flannel shirt, and my coupon habit meant I didn't understand money. But Gregory Hale nearly dropped his coffee cup when he heard me quote one sentence from chapter 7. And that was before I opened the brown folder sitting quietly in my lap. Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy real family stories with truth tension and a little quiet revenge, now and then, go ahead and subscribe. We've got plenty more coming. I live in a one-story brick house off Lake Boone Trail in Raleigh, North Carolina. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a screened porch with one loose board I keep promising to fix. A mailbox that leans slightly to the left like it's tired of carrying electric bills and grocery coupons. My neighbor Hank Wilkes once told me my house looked responsibly retired. I told him that sounded like an insult wrapped in khaki pants. Truth is, by the time you reach 68, you stop needing your life to impress strangers. You just want the gutters cleaned before hurricane season and a doctor who doesn't sigh when you mention your knees. Most mornings I drove my silver 2008 Toyota Camry to Jubala Coffee on Hillsborough Street around 7:10 a.m. Same parking spot when I could get it. Same order, black coffee and a bacon biscuit. I absolutely should not have been eating, according to my cardiologist. The Camry had 241,000 miles on it and made a sound every winter that reminded me of an asthmatic goat. Diane Mercer said the car deserved a military funeral. You realize she told me one Tuesday morning that your Toyota is now held together entirely by optimism and duct tape. I said, that's also true of my lower back. That's the kind of friendship we had. Diane owned a little bakery in Durham called Mercer's Oven. Best peach cobbler in 3 counties. She'd been my closest friend for almost 30 years, which sounds suspicious until you realize we spent at least half that time insulting each other. Now, before you picture me as some lonely old man eating canned soup under dim lighting, let me clear something up. I had a good life. Not perfect, but good. My wife Eleanor made sure of that. Eleanor Russell taught 2nd grade for 27 years in Wake County Public Schools. Tiny woman, sharp, green eyes. Could silence a room full of 7-year-olds with one look over the rim of her glasses. I watched grown men at Home Depot apologize to her without understanding why. She died 6 years ago from ovarian cancer. Funny thing about grief, people think it arrives like a tornado. Loud, violent, dramatic. Sometimes it does. But sometimes grief is quieter than that. Sometimes it's standing in the grocery store staring at the family-sized box of Frosted Flakes before realizing nobody else in the house eats them anymore. Sometimes it's hearing a joke at 9:14 p.m. and turning to tell someone who isn't there, I need you to understand something before we go further. Eleanor was the kind of woman who made everybody around her better without ever demanding credit for it. And Brandon worshipped her when he was little. Back then, my son used to follow me everywhere. He sat beside me while I changed the oil in that same Camry when it still smelled new. He wore UNC hoodies 3 sizes too big because he wanted to look older. He once cried for 40 minutes because he thought we couldn't afford his middle school field trip to Washington, D.C. We could afford it. Barely. But we did. I worked 2 jobs for years. Community financial workshops during the day, tax preparation during spring seasons, weekend consulting for small credit unions. Eleanor graded spelling tests at the kitchen table while I balanced spreadsheets beside her. We were tired all the time, but Brandon got into UNC Chapel Hill debt-free. That mattered to us. I still remember moving him into Hinton James Residence Hall in August of 2005. 93 degrees outside, sweat rolling down my back, Brandon carrying boxes labeled econ notes and important stuff like he was already preparing to become Secretary of the Treasury. He hugged Eleanor before we left. Then he hugged me too. Hard. "You did good, Dad," he said. Funny how certain sentences stay alive long after the moment dies. For a while, everything was fine. Brandon graduated, got into finance, moved to Charlotte, bought expensive shoes with names I still don't understand, married Vanessa, who honestly tried harder than people gave her credit for. They bought a condo in South End with white countertops so shiny they looked medically sterile. And slowly, almost invisibly, my son became embarrassed by me. Not openly at first. It started small. He'd suggest restaurants where he knew I'd feel underdressed. He stopped introducing me as my dad and started saying my father in that careful, corporate voice people use when they're trying to sound expensive. One Christmas, I caught him quietly moving my old brown coat off the dining room chair before his co-workers arrived. That one stung more than I expected. You know that look people get when they think nobody noticed them being ashamed of you? Yeah, that one. Now, to be fair, Brandon wasn't cruel all the time. That's what made it complicated. He still called every couple weeks, still checked on me during storms, still sent me links to articles about blood pressure medication like I was 93 and living under a bridge. But somewhere along the way, success convinced him simplicity meant ignorance. And that's a dangerous mistake, especially with money. One Friday afternoon, about 8 months before the Brunch disaster, Brandon came to Raleigh wearing loafers without socks and carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my refrigerator. He stood in my kitchen looking around like he'd accidentally entered a museum exhibit called Middle Class America Early 2000s. "You ever think about downsizing, Dad?" he asked. I looked around my own kitchen. The yellow ceramic cookie jar Eleanor loved. The scratch on the cabinet where Brandon rammed a toy fire truck when he was 6. The old clock above the stove running 4 minutes fast. Because Eleanor liked being early. "No," I said. "I think about fixing the porch." He gave that tight little smile financially successful people give when they think they're being patient with someone beneath them. That was the moment I realized something painful. My son respected money more than he respected the people who taught him how to survive without it. And the truly funny part, Brandon Russell thought I spent my entire life being cautious because I didn't understand wealth. What he never understood was that I had spent 30 years teaching people exactly how not to become fools with money. The first time anyone called me successful, I was standing in a community center basement in Durham that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. I remember thinking, they must have the wrong guy. Because at that point in my life, I didn't look like success. I looked like a man who knew where every discount grocery store in North Carolina was located and had strong opinions about which ones overcharged for bananas. That was the beginning. Back in the late 1990s, I started teaching small financial literacy workshops for working families. Nothing glamorous. Church basements in Raleigh, public libraries in Chapel Hill, occasionally a union hall where the folding chairs felt like they were designed by someone who had never experienced comfort in their life. I taught people how to escape credit card traps, how to read loan agreements without needing a lawyer sitting on their shoulder, and how to understand compound interest without feeling like math was a personal attack. Most of my students were exhausted before they even walked in. Nurses finishing 12-hour shifts, truck drivers on their only day off, single mothers carrying toddlers on one hip, and financial stress on the other. And I loved it. Because when you explain money in plain language and you see someone's eyes change just slightly, you realize you're not teaching math. You're teaching survival. My wife Eleanor used to say, I had a basement voice. What's that supposed to mean? I asked her once. It means people believe you more when you're standing in a room that smells like mildew, she said, without looking up from her grading papers. That was Eleanor. No nonsense. Maximum accuracy. One night after a workshop in Durham, a man came up to me holding a wrinkled notebook. He was a bus mechanic from Greensboro, hands still black with grease. He said, "Sir, I think you just saved my marriage." I told him, I'm pretty sure that requires a different kind of license. Eleanor laughed at that one for a full minute. It was after that workshop series that someone from a small regional publishing company approached me. They said my material could help more people if it wasn't just spoken in rooms with bad lighting. They wanted me to write a book. I said no, immediately, because I had seen what visibility does to people. It turns useful things into complicated things. And I liked useful things. But Eleanor, she had a different opinion. She sat across from me at our kitchen table in Raleigh, stirring her tea slowly, like she was negotiating with time itself. Callum, she said, you always tell people to use their resources wisely. Yes, I said. This might be yours. That was how Nichols Nails and Nest Eggs was born. But here's the part nobody ever knew. I didn't publish it under my name. I used a pseudonym, C.R. Whitmore. It wasn't dramatic. No hidden identity conspiracy. I just didn't want attention. I didn't want speaking tours or financial podcasts or strangers recognizing me in grocery stores while I debated cereal prices. I wanted the information to do the work, not the author. The book wasn't flashy. No promises of becoming rich in 6 months. No secret hacks or nonsense like that. Just simple truths. Don't borrow what you don't understand. Don't invest in what you can't explain to a teenager. And never trust anyone who calls risk guaranteed. It spread slowly at first, then faster, then unexpectedly fast. A financial advisor in Atlanta told me years later that he built half his practice on concepts from Chapter 4. A nurse from Asheville mailed me a letter saying she finally paid off her credit card debt after 12 years. A retired veteran wrote, I read your book 3 times. The 3rd time I stopped feeling stupid. That one stayed with me. Eleanor used to collect those letters in a shoebox labeled, Proof You Were Useful. She said it like it was a scientific category. Now, Diane Mercer, my oldest friend and owner of Mercer's Oven Bakery in Durham was the only person who knew the truth. She found out by accident, of course. Diane always finds things out by accident, mostly because she has the subtlety of a falling ladder. One morning she slammed a copy of my book on the counter of her bakery. "Explain this," she said. I looked at it, took a sip of coffee, said nothing. She narrowed her eyes. "Callum Russell, C.R. Whitmore. You think I'm stupid?" I said, "No. I think you're loud." She laughed so hard she nearly dropped a tray of peach cobbler. "You are the cheapest famous man in North Carolina," she said. "Do you know that I prefer financially discreet?" I replied. She still teases me about it every time I walk into her bakery. Sometimes she'll whisper, "Oh, look, it's the ghostwriter, just loud enough for customers to hear." But she also respects it, more than I expected. Because Diane understands something most people don't. Not all value is meant to be displayed. Now here's where things start connecting to that brunch in Charlotte. About a year before everything went sideways, I noticed Brandon changing. Not all at once. That would have been too easy. It was incremental. First, he stopped asking my opinion about financial decisions. Then he started explaining financial concepts to me slowly, like I had suffered a head injury at some point, and nobody told him. Then came the subtle embarrassment, the way he looked at my clothes, the way he paused before saying I was retired instead of saying what I actually did. One evening, he visited Raleigh unannounced. He walked into my house, set his phone on my kitchen counter, and said, "Dad, you should probably start thinking about how to structure your assets properly." I remember looking at him for a long moment, not angry, just curious. Structure them how I asked. He smiled like a man about to explain electricity to someone who still uses candles. "That's what I do, Dad. That's my world now." I nodded slowly. "I see," I said. Then I opened the drawer next to the stove and took out a copy of my own book, still under the C.R. Whitmore name. I placed it on the table. He glanced at it, didn't pick it up, didn't read the name closely enough. That was the moment I realized something important. My son didn't actually see me. He saw a version of me he had already decided on. And once people do that, no amount of truth can compete with their assumptions. Brandon thought I was financially naive. He thought I was cautious because I didn't understand risk. He thought simplicity meant ignorance. What he didn't know, what he never bothered to ask, was that the man sitting in front of him had spent decades teaching people far smarter than him how to avoid financial disaster. And that same man was about to sit across from him at brunch in Charlotte, without telling him a single thing. Not yet. Because sometimes the best way to correct someone's misunderstanding is to let them finish speaking first. Brandon's call came in at 8:17 p.m. on a Wednesday. I remember the exact time because I was standing in my kitchen stirring a cup of instant oatmeal that tasted like regret and cardboard. "Hey, Dad," he said. Too cheerful. That was my first warning sign. Brandon never used "Hey, Dad" when he actually needed nothing. He usually went with Dad, or in rare cases, the formal father, when he was trying to sound emotionally distant, but still polite. "Evening, Brandon," I said. A pause. The kind of pause that carries weight. "So, Vanessa and I were thinking," he began. I leaned against the counter. "That phrase 'we were thinking' is financial code for I already made a decision, and I'm about to ask you to validate it." "Go on," I said. "We're hosting brunch this weekend in Charlotte." Nothing fancy. Just family and a couple of people from work. It'd be good for you to come down. That was interesting. Brandon didn't do just family anymore. Not unless there was something inside the family he wanted to leverage. What's the occasion? I asked. Just networking, he said quickly. You know, conversations about estate planning, future structure, that kind of thing. There it was. Estate planning. That phrase again. Like a polite disguise for something far less polite. I see, I said. You should come, he added. It'll be good for you to hear how things are done now. Modern approaches. I almost smiled, because I had been hearing variations of that sentence for 30 years. Different generations, same confidence. I'll come, I said. Too easily. That confused him. Great, he said. We'll do it at the Oak and Fig. 11:30. Then he added almost casually, oh, and Dad. Maybe dress a little, presentable. That word landed softly, but it always does. I'll do my best, I said. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a while longer than necessary. Eleanor's chair was still across from me. I never moved it. I told myself it was because the space felt balanced that way. But truthfully, it was because I wasn't ready to admit she wasn't coming back to sit in it. I reached for my legal folder, the one I only used when things started smelling like manipulation. Inside were printed emails, transaction summaries, property documents, and one very uncomfortable truth about Brandon's investment project in South End, Charlotte. A condo development called the Foundry View. It sounded impressive. It was not. High leverage, poor timing, overconfident projections, and one partner, Tyler Beck, who had the financial ethics of a raccoon in a dumpster. Brandon didn't see it yet, but he would. I closed the folder. All right, I said to no one. Charlotte, it is. The next morning, I drove to Durham. Not because I needed pastries, although I did, but because I needed Diane Mercer. Her bakery sat on a quiet corner street just off Durham Farmers Market. The sign outside always slightly crooked, like it was permanently judging the city. Diane was behind the counter when I walked in. She looked up, squinted, and said, "You look like a man about to make a decision that will ruin someone else's brunch." "Good morning to you, too," I replied. She slid a coffee across the counter. "No sugar," she said. "You already live dangerously enough." I sat down. "I'm going to Charlotte," I said. She froze mid-motion with a tray of peach cobbler. "That's where your son lives, right?" "Yes." She studied my face. Then she said, family trouble brunch. My favorite genre. I almost laughed. That was Diane's talent making tension feel survivable. I slid the folder onto the counter. She didn't open it immediately. That was her second talent, knowing when not to rush. "So what's the play?" she asked finally. I leaned back. "My son thinks I don't understand money," I said. Diane snorted. "Your son thinks Wi-Fi is a personality trait." That's not inaccurate. She finally opened the folder, scanning a few pages. Her expression shifted slightly. Not surprise, concern. "That boy is standing on a sinking ship and calling it architecture," she said. "I know," I replied. She closed the folder. Then she did something unexpected. She reached over and flicked my forehead. Hard. "Ow," I said. "Callum Russell." She said, "Do not let that boy talk to you like you are a broken calculator." I rubbed my forehead. I wasn't planning to. She leaned forward. "Good. Because Eleanor would haunt me personally if I let you walk into Charlotte unprepared." That hit differently. Diane never used Eleanor's name lightly. Then she pushed a small white box toward me. "Peach cobbler. Still warm. For the road," she said. "And in case your son tries to starve your dignity out of you." I smiled. "Thank you." She waved me off. "Also," she added, "you look like a substitute geography teacher who lost a fight with a lawn chair." "Change your shirt." "I like this shirt." "It hates you." That made me laugh out loud. I left the bakery an hour later wearing a different shirt Diane insisted was less emotionally depressing. As I drove back toward Raleigh, I thought about Brandon. Not with anger, not yet. With something quieter. Observation. Because here's the thing about people who underestimate you. They always reveal their intentions early. They just assume you're not paying attention. By the time I hit Interstate 85, heading south towards Charlotte, I already knew what the brunch was really about. It wasn't family bonding. It wasn't networking. It was pressure. A carefully staged environment. A table full of witnesses. And my son, trying to convince himself he had finally outgrown the man who taught him how to stand. What Brandon didn't know was that I had already sat at hundreds of tables like that, and I never came unprepared. I tapped the dashboard lightly. "All right, Eleanor," I said under my breath. "Let's go see what our son thinks he's built." And Charlotte started getting closer. Charlotte always feels like it's trying a little too hard. That's not an insult. It's just true. Glass towers, polished lobbies, people walking too fast while pretending they're not in a hurry. Everything's shiny enough to reflect ambition back at you. The Oak and Fig sat right off Tryon Street, tucked between a boutique hotel and a financial advisory firm that probably charged extra for confidence. I parked my Camry in a spot that clearly said reserved, because I've learned something important in life. Confidence is often just ignoring signage with conviction. At 11:09 a.m., I walked in. The air smelled like lemon oil espresso and money that had never been folded in a pocket. And there they were. Brandon stood first. Tailored navy blazer, no tie. Watch too expensive to be practical. The kind of outfit that says, "I want you to notice I don't need to try." He saw me and did that quick scan. Shoes, shirt, face, carried judgment like a reflex. "Dad," he said, smiling too late, "you made it." "Traffic on I-85 made other plans," I said. Vanessa stood beside him. She hugged me immediately. That was always her strength. She didn't let other people's awkwardness decide her behavior. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly, and I believed her. Then Tyler Beck arrived. Late. Of course he was. Tyler always entered rooms like he was doing the room a favor. Dark suit, perfect hair, that practiced smile of someone who's never had to apologize for a bad decision in his life. "Mr. Russell," he said, shaking my hand like he was testing the durability of my existence. "Tyler," I replied. He looked at my Camry through the window, smirked slightly. I filed that away. And then Gregory Hale arrived. He didn't announce himself. He just appeared. Mid-50s. Calm posture. Expensive but understated watch. The kind of man who doesn't need to prove anything because he's already lost interest in proving things. He looked at me for exactly 2 seconds longer than normal people do. Not suspicious, not dismissive, recognizing. That matters. We all sat down at a round table near the window. Brunch menus arrived. Brandon immediately started talking. "So, Dad," he said, leaning back, "we've been reviewing some long-term structures for the family assets." Family assets? I almost smiled. That phrase again. Vanessa glanced at him like she wasn't sure this was going where she thought it was going. Tyler nodded too eagerly. Gregory said nothing. I opened the menu. Avocado toast, $18. French omelet, $24. Coffee, $6.50. Brunch, I realized, is just breakfast with better branding. Brandon kept talking. So with the South End project, timing is critical. We're restructuring capital allocation and... Brandon, I interrupted gently. He stopped. Not because I raised my voice, because I rarely do. Yes, he said. What's the actual problem you're trying to solve, I asked. Silence. That was my first mistake in his eyes. Not letting him finish. He smiled slightly. The condescending one. You'll understand better in a minute, he said. It's a bit advanced, Tyler chuckled. Vanessa looked down at her hands. Gregory leaned forward slightly. Interesting, Brandon continued. Dad, honestly, you've always been cautious with money in a way that well doesn't reflect how modern investing works. There it was. The word. Cautious. Like it was a diagnosis. Like discipline was a flaw. I took a sip of water. Let him keep going. That's something I learned a long time ago. People reveal themselves fastest when they think they're winning. We're just trying to ensure you're protected, Brandon added. Protected. From what? From him. Or from reality. Then he slid a document folder across the table. Manila. Clean edges. Too clean. I prepared something for you to sign, he said. That sentence changed the temperature of the room. Even the coffee seemed to pause. Vanessa straightened immediately. Brandon. It's standard, he said quickly. Tyler leaned in. Very common in restructuring cases like this. Gregory still said nothing, but his eyes shifted. To me. Then to the folder. Then back to Brandon. I didn't touch it yet. Instead, I looked at my son. Not the businessman. Not the advisor. Just the boy who once cried because he thought I couldn't afford a school trip. You're calling me financially illiterate? I said calmly. Brandon exhaled like I was being difficult. I didn't say it like that, he replied. You did, I said. A small silence again. The kind that grows roots. Gregory leaned back slightly. Now he was watching differently. Brandon continued, voice tightening. Look, Dad. You don't understand complex financial instruments. That's okay. That's why I do this professionally. Tyler nodded. Too fast. Too confidently. That's always a sign. Brandon tapped the folder. This just transfers oversight to me so we can stabilize everything. Ah, there it was. Control disguised as care. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said quietly, Brandon, who drafted this? He blinked. Legal team, he said quickly. Which legal team? I asked. A fraction of hesitation. Too small for most people. But I noticed. Tyler answered this time. A firm we work with in Charlotte. I said. And I opened the folder. Just slightly. Not enough to read everything. Just enough to feel the structure of it. And that's when Gregory Hale finally spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just one sentence. Wait! All eyes turned to him. He was staring at me now. Not at the document. At me. I know you, Gregory said slowly. Brandon frowned. You do? Gregory ignored him. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then he said something I didn't expect. Are you Whitmore? The table changed. Not metaphorically. Actually changed. Brandon stopped breathing properly. Tyler's smile broke for the first time. Vanessa turned to me sharply. I didn't answer immediately. Because sometimes silence is more accurate than explanation. Gregory leaned forward. I read your book, he said. Years ago. It saved my firm from a catastrophic lending model. Now the air was different. Brandon looked between us, like the room had started speaking a language he didn't understand. What book, he asked. But no one answered him yet. Gregory kept looking at me, almost amused, almost relieved. I thought you were just a myth in financial training circles, he said. A name people referenced, but nobody had met. I sighed slightly. Depends on who's asking, I said. And that's when I noticed something very important. Brandon wasn't just confused anymore. He was starting to understand something worse. That he might not be the most informed person at the table. And that realization was only the beginning. For a few seconds, nobody at the table knew what to do with Gregory Hale's question. Are you C.R. Whitmore? It hung in the air like a dropped glass that somehow hadn't shattered yet. Brandon looked at Gregory, then at me, then back again. His face did something I'd never seen before in him. It hesitated. Vanessa's hand slowly moved off the tablecloth like she was suddenly aware she was touching something fragile. Tyler Beck, on the other hand, smiled too quickly. That's interesting, Tyler said, trying to reclaim control of the moment. We've all read a lot of industry material. Gregory didn't even glance at him. He was still looking at me, waiting. And I realized something in that moment. This wasn't just recognition. This was respect being reactivated. I'm not a myth, I said, finally taking a sip of water. Just a man who prefers not to be Googled at family brunch. That got a small laugh out of Gregory. Brandon didn't laugh. He was watching me like I had shifted weight in the room without moving. Gregory leaned forward slightly. I used your framework on consumer debt modeling, he said. We rebuilt our entire outreach program after reading Chapter 7. Brandon blinked. Wait. What book? He asked again, slower this time. Nobody answered him directly. Because something more important was happening. Power had changed hands without anyone announcing it. Gregory turned slightly toward Brandon now. You didn't know? He asked. Brandon forced a smile. Know what, Gregory? Looked back at me. You're sitting on one of the most quietly influential financial literacy texts in the last 20 years. That sentence landed harder than anything Brandon had said all morning. Tyler shifted in his chair. Vanessa stared at me now, not like I was her father-in-law, but like she was seeing a missing piece of a puzzle she'd been trying to ignore. I didn't look at Brandon yet, not immediately, because I already knew what I would see there. Confusion first, then discomfort, then something worse. Recalculation. Brandon finally leaned back in his chair. This is surprising, he said carefully, like he was trying to reduce the size of what was happening. I nodded. I imagine it is, Gregory continued. I used to teach your book in internal workshops, he said. We called it Whitmore Principles. My analysts thought I made them up. That made me smile slightly. I didn't realize I had branding, I said. Gregory chuckled. You do now. Brandon looked at me again, but this time not with embarrassment, with something closer to alarm, because he was starting to understand the worst possible version of this situation. Not that I was impressive, but that I had always been this, and he just hadn't known. Tyler finally tried to intervene. Look, he said, forcing a casual tone. Even if there's some historical relevance here, we're talking about current restructuring, modern instruments, real-time capital allocation. Gregory turned his head slowly toward Tyler. For the first time, he looked unimpressed. I know what we're talking about, Gregory said. Then he looked back at me. And I also know what he wrote about leveraged overconfidence in illiquid markets. That phrase hit the table like a quiet warning siren. Brandon stiffened, because that sounded uncomfortably familiar. I could see him trying to place it, trying to remember where he'd heard something like that. Gregory continued almost gently now. You wrote that people confuse complexity with intelligence, he said to me, and that the moment someone tries to impress you with jargon instead of clarity, you should assume they're either insecure or selling something. Now the silence changed again. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was exposure. Tyler cleared his throat. Vanessa looked down. Brandon stared at the folder in front of me like it had turned into something else entirely. And I finally looked at my son. Really looked. Not with anger, not with disappointment, just clarity. You were saying something about me not understanding modern finance, I said calmly. Brandon swallowed. It was more nuanced than that, he said. Gregory gave a small, almost invisible smile. That was the moment I knew he understood everything. Not just the book, but the situation. Because people like Gregory don't just recognize ideas. They recognize patterns. And Brandon Russell had become a very obvious one. I opened the folder fully now. Not dramatically, just enough for everyone to see. Inside were printed emails, investment summaries, a breakdown of the South End condo project, and a series of financial projections that even a first-year analyst would hesitate to sign their name on. Brandon leaned forward slightly. What is that? He asked. I tapped the top page. This, I said, is what happens when someone confuses optimism with underwriting. Tyler shifted again. Brandon's eyes scanned the document, faster now, hunting for reassurance, not finding it. Gregory didn't touch the papers. He didn't need to. He was already reading the situation. Brandon finally spoke again. You went through our documents, he asked, voice tightening. I went through what you sent me, I said, and what your emails suggested you weren't sending me. That landed. Hard. Vanessa looked at Brandon now with a different expression. Not anger. Not yet. Concern. Because she was realizing she hadn't been in control of the narrative either. Brandon leaned back slowly. For the first time all morning, he didn't look like he was leading anything. He looked like he was trying to find the edge of the table to hold on to. Gregory finally spoke again. "Brandon," he said calmly, "who advised you on this structure?" Brandon hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Tyler answered too quickly. "We consulted multiple sources." Gregory cut him off. "No," he said. "I asked him." Silence again. Brandon swallowed. "Tyler handled most of it," he said quietly. There it was, the smallest crack, but enough. Gregory leaned back slightly and said something that changed the temperature of the table again. "I'm out." Tyler froze. What he said. Gregory nodded once. "I don't participate in deals that rely on misunderstanding the person across from me." Brandon's face went pale. "Gregory, wait! This is just a misunderstanding." But Gregory stood up. Not angrily, not dramatically, just decisively. "I don't think it is," he said. Then he looked at me one last time. There was something like respect there, and something like apology for what was about to unfold. He nodded slightly. "C.R. Whitmore," he said. "It was an honor." And then he walked away. And that was the moment Brandon Russell realized the table was no longer his. The moment Gregory Hale stood up and walked out, the entire table didn't just get quieter, it collapsed inward. Not physically, emotionally, like someone had pulled the air out of a sealed room. Brandon watched him leave first, then slowly turned back to me. His expression wasn't anger yet. Anger comes later. What I saw first was disbelief trying to hold itself together. Tyler Beck, on the other hand, shifted immediately into damage control mode. "Gregory's being impulsive," he said quickly. "This doesn't change the fundamentals of the deal." I almost smiled at that, because that's what people say when they realize the foundation is gone, but the furniture still looks fine. Vanessa didn't speak. She just looked at Brandon, not like a wife defending a husband, but like someone trying to locate the version of him she thought she married. Brandon finally spoke. "Dad, what was that?" he asked. His voice was lower now. Less confident, less rehearsed. I leaned back in my chair slightly. That I said calmly was someone recognizing a pattern you didn't know you were standing inside of. Tyler let out a short laugh. "Come on," he said. "Let's not dramatize this. A book recognition moment doesn't change a financial structure." I turned my eyes to him, slowly, not aggressively, just enough. "Tyler," I said, "do you know what Chapter 7 of that book is about?" He blinked. "No." Brandon looked between us. I continued, "It's about people who use confidence as camouflage." That made Tyler stop smiling. "Just slightly." Brandon rubbed his forehead. "This is ridiculous," he said quietly. "We're talking about a condo development in South End, not philosophy." I nodded. "Most financial disasters start as just a condo development," I said. That hit him harder than I expected, because I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't arguing. I was simply removing comfort. Vanessa finally spoke. "Brandon," she said softly, "what exactly did you sign me into?" That question changed his posture instantly, because now it wasn't business anymore. It was personal exposure. He turned to her quickly. "It's fine," he said too fast. "It's structured. We've got coverage." Tyler jumped in again. "Absolutely. Worst case scenario is minimal downside exposure." I interrupted him. "Stop," I said. Not loud, just final. Everyone froze, even Tyler. I reached into the folder and pulled out a single page, then slid it across the table. Brandon looked at it, then frowned, then read it again. His eyes moved faster this time. I watched the exact moment he understood. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like a light turning on in a room he didn't realize was dark. This clause, I said, calmly tapping the paper, allows your partner to transfer liability to personal guarantees under specific market conditions. Brandon shook his head slightly. No, that's not how it was explained. That's how it was written, I said. Tyler leaned forward. That's standard language, he insisted. I looked at him. Then you won't mind explaining why the restructuring threshold triggers under projected vacancy rates instead of actual occupancy data. Silence. Tyler didn't answer because he couldn't. Brandon turned to him slowly. Tyler, what does that mean? He asked. Tyler forced a smile. It's technical. That word again. Technical. A shield people use when they don't want to translate truth. Vanessa leaned back slightly in her chair. I think I need to sit down, she said quietly. Brandon didn't respond. He was staring at the document now like it had rewritten itself in front of him. I didn't rush him, because understanding is its own kind of punishment. Finally, he looked up. Dad, he said. And there it was. Not arrogance, not confidence, just confusion mixed with something worse. Realization that the ground beneath him wasn't stable. Yes, I said. He swallowed. You knew about this, he said slowly. I nodded. Yes. His voice tightened. And you didn't tell me. I held his gaze. I wanted you to explain it first, I said. That hit him, harder than anything else so far. Tyler stood up abruptly. This is getting out of hand, he said. We should table this discussion. But no one moved. No one followed him, not even Brandon, because Tyler had become irrelevant without knowing it. Brandon leaned forward slightly now. His voice changed. Not louder, but sharper. So what? You just let me walk into this? He asked. I didn't flinch. No, I said. I let you talk. That sentence landed differently. Vanessa looked between us. Brandon shook his head again. This is humiliating, he said under his breath. And there it was. The word he actually meant from the beginning. Not financial illiteracy. Not misunderstanding. Humiliation. Because for Brandon, this was never just about money. It was about identity. I leaned forward slightly. Brandon, I said quietly, you didn't invite me here for a family brunch. He didn't answer. You invited me here to agree with you in front of witnesses, I continued. Silence. And when I didn't, I said, you tried to rewrite me. That sentence finally broke something in him. Not loudly, but visibly. His shoulders dropped slightly. His confidence didn't disappear, but it cracked. Tyler grabbed his briefcase. I'm done here, he muttered, and he left too. Just like Gregory. Only this time nobody watched him go. Brandon didn't even look. The table was now only 4 people, and one truth no one could avoid anymore. Vanessa spoke softly. I didn't know any of this, she said. I nodded once. I believe you. Brandon looked at her, then back at me. His voice was lower now. Less defensive, more human. "So what happens now?" he asked. That was the first real question he had asked all morning. Not an argument, not a statement, a question. I closed the folder slowly, and for the first time since I sat down, I let the silence sit with us. Then I said something simple. "Now," I said, "you learn the difference between confidence and understanding." Brandon didn't respond, because for the first time in his life, he didn't have a rehearsed answer. And the brunch table finally stopped pretending it was just brunch. The silence after Tyler left wasn't the same kind of silence we had before. Before it was tension. Now it was aftermath. Brandon sat back in his chair slowly, like his body had just realized it no longer needed to perform anything. Vanessa hadn't touched her coffee in minutes, and I could see it in her eyes now, not confusion anymore, not shock. Understanding, that quiet, uncomfortable kind that arrives when the story you believed starts rearranging itself in real time. Brandon finally broke the silence. "Who is C.R. Whitmore?" he asked again, but this time it wasn't dismissive. It was careful, like he was afraid the answer might already be sitting in front of him. I looked at him for a moment, then said, "A man who preferred not to sit at tables like this." Vanessa let out a small breath. Not a laugh. Not quite. Something softer. Brandon rubbed his forehead. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "Gregory Hale doesn't just walk away from deals like that." I nodded. "You're right," I said. "He doesn't." That made him look up. "Then why did he?" Brandon asked. I leaned back slightly. "Because he recognized something you didn't," I said. "And what's that?" he pressed. I didn't answer immediately. Because this is where people usually expect drama. A big reveal, a dramatic confession. But real life doesn't always do that. Instead, I said, integrity doesn't announce itself. It just decides where it will sit. Vanessa looked down at that. Brandon didn't respond right away. Then he said quietly, "So you're telling me he walked away because of you?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "He walked away because of what your deal looked like when compared to what he knows is responsible." That distinction mattered, more than Brandon wanted it to. He leaned forward again. "And what does he know?" he asked. I reached into my folder again. Not for a document this time, but for something smaller. A folded, slightly worn paperback copy of my book. Nichols, Nails, and Nest Eggs. C.R. Whitmore printed across the bottom. I placed it on the table. Brandon stared at it, then laughed once. Short, uncomfortable. "This," he said, "this is what all of this is about." I didn't react, because I already knew he'd say something like that. Vanessa reached out and picked it up gently. She turned it over in her hands. "This is real?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. Brandon shook his head. "So my dad writes a book under a fake name, and suddenly a billionaire investor changes his entire position at Brunch," he said. "That's not what happened," I said calmly. "Then what did?" he snapped. Now there it was, frustration finally breaking through. I looked at him, and for the first time that day I didn't filter my words. "You assumed I was financially illiterate," I said. Brandon opened his mouth, but I raised my hand slightly. "And because you assumed that I continued, you stopped listening." That shut him up. Vanessa looked between us, not taking sides, just absorbing. I leaned forward slightly. "You don't understand something Very important, I said. Brandon frowned. What he asked? People like Gregory Hale don't build trust on presentation, I said. They build it on consistency. I tapped the book. This has been consistent for 20 years. Brandon stared at it again, like it had changed weight. Vanessa spoke quietly. I've heard of this book, she said. Brandon turned to her quickly. You have? He asked. She nodded slowly. My father's financial advisor used it in his practice, she said. He said it was foundational. That word hit Brandon harder than anything I had said. Foundational. Not fuzz, not flashy. Foundational. Brandon leaned back again. For the first time, he looked tired. Not defeated, just stripped of momentum. I didn't know, he said quietly. I nodded. I know, I said. That was the first honest thing he had said all morning. Then he added something else. I thought you were just careful because you didn't understand the risk, he said. I let that sit for a moment, then replied, That's the difference between you and me, Brandon. He looked up. I never needed risk to prove I understood value. Silence again, but different now. Less defensive, more reflective. Vanessa placed the book down carefully. So what happens with the deal? She asked softly. I looked at her, then at Brandon, and said, There is no deal anymore. Brandon exhaled slowly, like he had been holding his breath since Gregory left. I lost everything he asked. I shook my head. No, I said. You lost momentum. That's different, he frowned. It doesn't feel different, he muttered. I nodded. I know, I said. A pause. Then I added, but it is. That's when his phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it, froze. Vanessa leaned in slightly. What is it? She asked. Brandon didn't answer immediately, then turned the screen slightly. A message. From Gregory Hale. Short. One sentence. I will not be participating further. I recommend reassessing your assumptions before your next partnership. Brandon stared at it, then slowly put the phone down. No anger this time, just stillness. Vanessa reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. That surprised me. Brandon finally looked at me again. His voice was quieter now. Did you plan all of this? He asked. I exhaled. No, I said. I planned to come to brunch. That was true. He studied me for a long moment, then asked something different. Why didn't you just tell me who you were? I thought about that. Longer than he expected, then answered honestly. Because if I had told you, I said you would have believed me for the wrong reasons. That sat heavily between us. Vanessa nodded slightly, like she understood more than she wanted to admit. Brandon leaned back again. And for the first time all morning, he didn't try to fix anything. He just looked at me, not as a problem, not as a weakness, but as something he had misunderstood for a very long time. Outside the window, Charlotte kept moving like nothing had happened. People walked by, cars passed. Brunch continued for the rest of the world. But inside that table, something irreversible had already shifted. And none of us knew yet what would come after it. But we all knew one thing. It wouldn't go back to what it was before. The waiter came back twice before anyone at the table even noticed him. That tells you something about the kind of silence we were sitting in. Not peaceful silence, not comfortable silence. The kind of silence where everyone is privately rebuilding their understanding of reality in real time. Brandon finally broke it, not with confidence, Not with anger, with something much more dangerous. Confusion trying to turn into control. "So what now?" he asked again. But this time it wasn't a question, it was a test. Vanessa looked at him carefully, like she was waiting to see which version of him would answer. I leaned forward slightly and placed my hands on the table. This is the part where people usually expect drama, a confrontation, a final blow. But what I had learned over 68 years is this: the most expensive moments in life are not loud. They are precise. "I'm not signing anything," I said calmly. Brandon blinked. "That's not what this is," he said quickly. "This is just adjustment. Risk mitigation." Tyler's words, not his. I nodded slowly. "Then let's call it what it is," I said. Brandon frowned. "What?" "A transfer of control," I replied. That made him stiffen. Vanessa shifted slightly in her seat. I reached into the folder again, this time pulling out a second set of documents. Not the ones Brandon expected, not the ones Tyler prepared, but my own. Brandon watched me carefully now. "What is that?" he asked. I placed them down gently. "This is what you didn't know I already did," I said. Silence tightened. Vanessa leaned in slightly. Brandon didn't speak, so I continued. 3 months ago, I said I moved the majority of my liquid assets into a family trust. Brandon's eyes narrowed. "That's not possible without disclosure," he said immediately. "It is when you're the sole beneficiary and trustee is independent," I replied. Vanessa blinked. Brandon shook his head. "No, Dad, that's not why would you do that?" I looked at him. "Because I read your emails before you sent them," I said calmly. That landed harder than anything else. Brandon froze. "You went through my emails?" he asked sharply. "No," I said. "You left enough breadcrumbs in your financial summaries and investor drafts that I didn't need to." Vanessa looked down at the table again. Brandon's jaw tightened. "So you were, what, waiting for me to fail?" he asked. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I was waiting for you to ask the right questions." That silence again. Different, this time. He leaned forward. "And what questions were those?" he asked. I tapped the documents once. "Not how much money I had," I said. "Not how to control it. But why I didn't behave like you expected me to." Brandon stared at me. For the first time all morning, there was no performance left in him. Just something raw underneath. Frustration. And underneath that, embarrassment. Vanessa spoke quietly. "Brandon," she said, "did you actually understand the structure of this deal?" He didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Tyler wasn't here anymore to fill the silence. Gregory wasn't here to validate anything. It was just us. And truth doesn't need witnesses. Brandon exhaled slowly. "I thought I did," he said finally. That was the most honest sentence he had spoken all day. I nodded. "I know," I said. He looked down at the table, then back up at me. "But you still let me go into it," he said quietly. There it was, the real accusation. Not about money, about trust. I didn't avoid it. "You weren't asking for permission," I said. "You were asking for validation." That made him pause. Vanessa looked between us again. Brandon shook his head slightly. "So, what was the point of all this?" he asked. "This brunch," I said. He nodded. I leaned back slightly. "The point," I said, "was to see what you believed about me when you thought I couldn't hear you." That sentence changed his expression, because he understood exactly what I meant. Vanessa looked down again, and I added something quieter, and I heard everything. The words hung there, heavy. Brandon rubbed his face with one hand. I didn't mean it like that, he said, but even he didn't sound convinced anymore. I nodded. I know I said again. And I meant it. Because intention and impact don't always live in the same room. A pause followed, longer this time. Then Brandon asked something different. Are we ruined? He said. Vanessa looked at him sharply. But I answered first. No, I said. That surprised him. I continued. You're not ruined, I said. You're just exposed. That word again. Exposed. He looked uncomfortable, but listened. I tapped the trust documents once more. What you lose from mistakes, I said, is not always money. It's leverage. Brandon swallowed. Vanessa spoke softly. So what happens now? I looked at both of them, and for the first time since sitting down, I didn't sound like a father or a strategist, just a man telling the truth. Now I said you decide whether you want to be right or you want to be responsible. Brandon didn't respond immediately because those two things had always been the same in his mind until now. A server approached cautiously. Would you like me to bring the check? She asked. I nodded. Yes, I said. Brandon didn't argue. That was new. When the check arrived, I reached for it. Brandon hesitated, then said quietly, I've got it. I looked at him, and for a moment I saw something familiar. Not arrogance, not pride, but a small rebuilding sense of adulthood trying to reassemble itself after collapse. All right, I said, and I let him. He pulled out his card. Paid without theatrics, no performance, just silence. When it was done, he sat back again and said something I didn't expect. Dad, he said, I don't know how to fix this. I nodded. I know, I said. Then I added something he wasn't ready for. You're not supposed to yet. That confused him, but it was true. Fixing comes after understanding, not before. Vanessa reached for his hand again. This time he held it tighter. Outside, Charlotte kept moving like nothing had happened. Inside, something had ended, and something else had started. Not resolution, not forgiveness, but awareness. And sometimes that's the first honest step forward. The ride back from the Oak and Fig felt longer than the drive into Charlotte. Not because of distance, because of silence. Brandon didn't say much after we left the restaurant. Vanessa stayed quiet too occasionally, looking out the window like she was trying to reassemble the version of her life that had existed before brunch. I sat in the back seat of Brandon's car. He insisted on driving. A small detail, but an important one. Control, even when shaken, finds small things to hold on to. The city passed outside in clean streaks of glass and sunlight. Charlotte looked normal. That was the strange part. Nothing outside reflected what had just happened inside us. At a red light near South Boulevard, Brandon finally spoke. Dad, he said without turning around. What happens to Tyler? I looked out the window for a moment before answering. Tyler is already gone, I said. Brandon nodded slowly, like that made sense in a way he didn't want to admit. Vanessa finally spoke. Gregory really just walked away, she asked softly. Yes, I said. Why? Brandon added quickly. Because of you, I paused, then said, because of what I represented to him. That made him go quiet again. We drove the rest of the way without speaking. When we reached Raleigh, Brandon pulled up in front of my house on Lake Boone Trail. The same small brick house, the same leaning mailbox, the same porch board I still hadn't fixed. I got out slowly. Brandon stayed seated for a moment. Vanessa turned in her seat. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I nodded. I know, I replied. Then I looked at Brandon. He didn't meet my eyes immediately. When he finally did, it wasn't defiance anymore. It was fatigue and something else underneath. Recognition. I didn't think you'd be like that, he said. I almost smiled. That's the problem, I said. You didn't think. He didn't respond. Vanessa reached for his hand again. And this time, neither of them let go. I closed the car door gently and walked up my driveway. The air in Raleigh felt different than Charlotte. Quieter, slower, more honest. Inside the house, I set the peach cobbler Diane had given me on the counter. Still untouched. Still warm in memory more than temperature. I sat down at the kitchen table. Eleanor's chair was still across from me. I looked at it for a long time, then said quietly, well, that went better than expected. A pause. No answer, of course, but I could almost hear her. Something between a laugh and a sigh. My phone buzzed. A message from Gregory Hale. Short, simple. I would like to formally apologize for walking away without acknowledging your work properly. Your book shaped more than my business. It shaped my ethics. I stared at it for a moment, then set the phone down. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because some things take longer than a message to absorb. Another notification came, this time from Vanessa. I don't know how to fix what happened today, but I want to try. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I looked out the kitchen window. The same yard, the same quiet street, and thought about how strange it is that life doesn't explode when things change. It just continues differently. 2 days passed, then 3. Brandon didn't call. That was expected. Vanessa did send another message, longer this time, less formal, more human. On the 5th day, Diane showed up uninvited. Of course she did. She knocked once and walked in holding a bag of groceries like she owned the place. You look like a man who lost a chess game he didn't realize he was playing, she said. I won't argue with that, I replied. She placed groceries on the counter, then looked at me. So she said, did you enjoy your brunch performance? I sighed. Not particularly, she nodded. Good, she said. Means you're still human. Then she sat down. We didn't talk for a while. Just sat, which is what real friendship looks like when it doesn't need noise. Eventually, she asked, the boy going to be all right? I thought about that, then said, he's not broken. She raised an eyebrow. That didn't answer my question. I nodded. I know, I said, but it's the only honest answer I have. That night, Brandon came to my house. No warning, no call. Just a knock at 9:42 p.m. I opened the door. He stood there. No blazer, no performance, just a man in a plain jacket holding a paper cup of coffee. I wasn't sure if I should come, he said. I stepped aside. Then you're already late, I said. He sat at the kitchen table, Same place, everything had unraveled. He looked around like he was seeing it differently now. Not smaller, not bigger, just real. I lost the deal, he said quietly. I nodded. Yes, he swallowed. And I almost lost Vanessa. I didn't respond. Because that one wasn't mine to answer. He stared at the table. I thought you were embarrassed, he said. I leaned back slightly. I was never embarrassed by you, I said. That made him look up. Then what was it, he asked. I paused. Disappointed, I said, honestly. He nodded slowly. I deserve that, he said. Another silence. Longer this time. Then he said something I didn't expect. I don't want to be like Tyler, he said. I nodded. That's a good start, I replied. He let out a breath, then added, I don't really know how to fix this. I looked at him. The same words from before, but this time they meant something different. Because now he wasn't asking for rescue. He was asking for direction. So I said, then don't fix it. He frowned. What do I do then? Understand it, I said. That hung in the air, he nodded slowly. For the first time all week, he wasn't trying to win anything. Just listen. And that was enough for now. Not healed, not resolved, but real. And sometimes real is the only place anything meaningful can begin. Brandon didn't leave that night the way he used to leave my house. There was no rushed goodbye, no half smile, no checking his phone like something more important was waiting somewhere else. He just sat at the kitchen table for a while longer than necessary, staring at the same spot on the wood grain, like it might explain something back to him if he looked long enough. Finally, he stood up. I should go, he said quietly. I nodded. Yeah, I said. You probably should. He hesitated at the door. That hesitation meant more than anything he had said all week. Dad, he said. I looked at him. I didn't know, he added. I held his gaze. I know, I said. And this time I meant it in a different way than before. Not just acknowledgement, but understanding. He left slowly. No dramatic exit, just footsteps down the porch. The screen door closing softer than it used to. Then silence again. But this silence felt different, less heavy, more honest. 3 days passed, then 5, then 11. No calls from Brandon, no messages from Tyler, because Tyler was gone from the equation entirely now. Vanessa, however, sent small updates, not about business, about life, simple things. I think he's sleeping again. He's not eating much, but he's trying. He asked me about your book. That last message stayed with me longer than I expected, because curiosity is usually the first sign that pride is loosening its grip. One Saturday morning, Diane showed up again without warning. She walked into my kitchen, holding 2 coffees, and immediately said, "Don't look at me like that." I was in the neighborhood emotionally. I almost laughed. "That's not a real place," I said. "It is for me," she replied, sitting down. She looked at me carefully. He called, yet she asked. "No," I said. She nodded. "Good," she said. I frowned slightly. "Good." She took a sip of coffee. "Men, like your son, don't fix things by talking immediately," she said. "They fix things by circling the truth until it stops feeling like it's going to bite them." That sounded uncomfortably accurate. On the 12th day, Brandon came back. Not with Vanessa. Not with a car full of confidence or legal folders. Just himself. He stood on my porch at 8:03 a.m., holding nothing but a paper cup of gas station coffee. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were tired. He looked like someone who had stopped performing for an audience that no longer existed. I opened the door before he knocked. He blinked slightly. "I wasn't sure if I should come," he said. I stepped aside. "Then you're still thinking too much," I replied. He gave a small, tired half-smile. That was new. We sat at the kitchen table again. Same place as before. But the energy was different now. Less defensive, less sharp. More empty space for honesty. Brandon looked around slowly. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's dangerous," I replied. He actually chuckled. It was small but real. Then he leaned forward slightly. "I don't think I understood you," he said. I nodded. "That's accurate," I said. He exhaled. "I thought success meant knowing more than the people who raised you," he admitted. I didn't interrupt. He continued. "I thought you were behind, financially, mentally. I don't know. I just assumed I had moved past what you taught me." That word "assumed" sat heavily between us. I let it, because assumptions are usually where most damage begins. Brandon looked down at his hands. "But I watched everything fall apart in front of me," he said quietly, "and I didn't even see it coming." I nodded. "That's usually how it works," I said. He looked up. "And you did," he said. I didn't respond immediately, then said, "I didn't guess." I observed. That distinction mattered. He leaned back slightly. "I read your book," he said suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. "I know," I said. He shook his head. "No," he said. "I mean, really read it this time." Silence. Then he added something softer. "I didn't understand it when I was younger. I thought it was simple." I nodded. "It is," I said. He frowned slightly. "No," he corrected himself. "It's not. It's just honest." That made me pause, because that was closer to the truth than he realized. Vanessa appeared at the door behind him. She didn't interrupt, just stood there quietly. Brandon turned slightly when he noticed her. She didn't look angry, just present. Brandon stood up. They didn't speak immediately. Then she said, "I think we need to rebuild things differently." He nodded. "I know," he said. That was the first time he didn't argue with uncertainty. Later that afternoon, after they left, I sat on the porch. The same loose boards still hadn't been fixed. The Camry sat in the driveway, still slightly tilted in its parking stance, like it had given up trying to impress anyone years ago. Diane called me while I was sitting there. "So?" she asked. "He came back," I said. And I looked at the yard. "He's starting to see things," I said. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's more important than him understanding things." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Yeah," I said. "It is." Weeks passed. Brandon didn't transform. That's important. He didn't suddenly become wise or humble in a cinematic way. He just slowed down. He started asking questions instead of assuming answers. He stopped trying to impress people who didn't matter. He started calling me more often, not for advice, but for conversation. One evening, he said something I didn't expect. "Dad," he said, I don't think I ever really saw you." I looked out the window for a moment, then replied, "Most people don't see what they don't expect." There was a pause. Then he said, "I'm sorry." And this time, I didn't rush to soften it. I just said, I know, because some apologies aren't endings. They're beginnings that haven't learned how to stand yet. The truth is that life didn't wrap itself up neatly after that brunch. There was no perfect reconciliation, no cinematic forgiveness, just small adjustments, small understandings, small moments where pride stopped talking long enough for something real to enter the room. Brandon and I are still learning how to exist in the same story without misunderstanding each other. But something changed that day in Charlotte. Not because I revealed who I was, but because he finally stopped assuming who I wasn't. And that difference means everything. Life lesson. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's simple. People are rarely as simple as they appear in your assumptions, especially the quiet ones. Especially the ones who don't need to prove anything anymore. My son didn't disrespect me because he was evil. He did it because he mistook silence for absence and simplicity for lack of depth. And maybe you've done that too. We all have. We assume confidence is loud. We assume intelligence needs display. We assume experience looks like what we expect it to look like. But life has a habit of hiding its most important lessons in plain clothes. So before you judge someone by what they look like, or how they speak, or what you think they haven't achieved, ask yourself what you might be missing. Because sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who understands everything you're about to lose. If this story meant something to you, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been in a situation like this? We read every single one. And as always, thank you for being a part of this.